give up in that endeavor. So we met with President Zelensky, his team. We had a very deep, in-depth briefing by the Ukrainian military about the battle situation. I thought that was incredibly revealing, and the Prosecutor General is doing good work to hold people accountable. So here's my big takeaway. After meeting President Zelensky and interacting with the Ukrainian leadership, there's no way in hell they're going to quit. They're not going to concede an inch of Ukrainian territory to the Russians. They will fight to the last person to expel Russia from Ukraine. They're in it. They're sacrificed greatly. Russian war crimes are committed every day in front of your television, on your television screen. The Ukrainian people are more determined than ever, and they can sense a change in tide. 11 months ago today, this war started. We were told by our military leadership that Kyiv would fall in 4 days. 11 months later, the Ukrainians are slowly but surely dismembering the Russian military. But we're at an inflection point now, a tipping point. The issue of tanks has become center stage really in the world. And we're convinced, the three of us, that the Ukrainians need heavy tanks, that the best tank for the fight is the German Leopard tank, that American tanks can be helpful in this regard. If we send some Abrams tanks, it will open the floodgates to more tanks coming from allies and German Leopard tanks flowing into Ukraine. We're almost in World War I type battle conditions in the east. It's impossible, in my view, to dislodge the Russians by the Ukrainians unless they have tanks. We also believe that longer range rockets will help stop the counteroffensive that is building in the east. The Russians are moving on Bakhmut. They're making some gains. The HIMARS have been worth their weight in gold. ATACMS is a rocket system that has longer range. The goal is to dislodge the Russians from Ukraine by helping the Ukrainian military in that endeavor, give them the weapons they need to beat the Russians on the battlefield. The goal is not to send American troops. The goal is not to start World War III. The goal is to stop the invasion and kick Russia out of Ukraine and hold Russia accountable for the many crimes that have committed in the last 11 months. I am more optimistic today than any time in recent memory about military assistance going into Ukraine in the form of tanks. I've had discussions with our German allies. This is a moment for Germany to shine. The spotlight is on Germany, unlike any time really since World War II. They have a chance to be a force for good. The German Leopard tank can be outcome determinative on the battlefield, and I'm hoping that Germany will understand that defeating Putin in Ukraine is in Germany's national security interest. He will keep going if he's not stopped. If you don't believe me, listen to him. If he gets away with this, world order as we know it becomes a joke. Boundaries mean nothing. If he's not prosecuted, or those under his command are not prosecuted for blatant war crimes, then everything we said after World War II just becomes hollow rhetoric. Wouldn't it be embarrassing for the free world to gather in Munich in the middle of February talking about world order and freedom and the rule of law and recognizing sovereign nations' right to exist if by that time we had not provided the tanks that Ukraine desperately needs? So I'm hoping that the Department of Defense here in America will reassess their position. I understand the Abrams is not the best fit. I understand the technical problems associated with sending the Abrams. But what we're urging is to lead by example. The British sent, I think, 14 Challenger tanks, and that has set a precedent that I hope we will follow. And as to our German allies, the sooner you can make this decision, the better off for the world. The day that Berlin signs off on Poland and other nations sending the Leopard tank, the day that the German government says we will also send tanks, is a day closer to liberating Ukraine and ending this nightmare. Seldom in the history of modern warfare has so much depended on so few tanks. 300 tanks given to the Ukrainians who have an ability to take any weapon system and maximize its benefit, I think will change the outcome of this war. And to the American people, if you believe Putin winning in Ukraine doesn't affect you, you're wrong. I know we're tired of being involved in conflicts outside of our country, but everything we hold near and dear as a country is at stake. Boundaries no longer matter if you can rewrite boundaries by the force of arms. Putin will not stop, and China is watching very closely. If Putin's successful in his effort to break the will of the West and dismember Ukraine, there goes Taiwan. The converse is true. If we can rally as a freedom-loving people and help our allies throughout the world kick Putin out of Ukraine, and Ukraine is still standing as a sovereign democratic state, then I think peace in Europe will be secured for a long time to come, and the likelihood of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan goes down. So to the administration, the Biden administration, please send the tanks. To the Germans, please send tanks. You have a history to be a leader for good. You have a history to imprint modern Germany in a way that will be beneficial to future generations of Germans. I spent 4.5 years in Germany. I love the country, love the people. This is a chance for Germany to rise to the occasion. I hope they will.
Thanks. Thank you, Senator Graham. This trip to Ukraine was my third in 12 months, and our second in about 6 months. And I will tell you, it's difficult for me to put in words the awe I felt when I saw the bomb-damaged buildings, when we heard the air raids, when we met with President Zelensky and his military team, the awe that I feel for the people of Ukraine who are fighting and will fight to the death, will fight with pitchforks. They are outmanned. We cannot allow them to be outgunned. We cannot allow Ukraine to bleed to death or their people to starve and freeze to defeat. And I want to thank President Biden for saying that Ukraine will get everything it needs to win. I wish he had added everything it needs to win now. Now. There is an urgency to now. Time is not on our side. The Russians are coming, and their onslaught will begin in weeks, not months. The Ukrainians know it. Our intelligence and military know it. The world now knows it. There's no secret here. The Russians are about to begin a major counteroffensive. And the Ukrainians will begin their counteroffensive as well. The Ukrainians can win if they have the tools that are necessary, beginning with tanks. The Leopard 2 tanks are important because they are there. They're in Europe, thousands of them, within easy transport, training, fueling. They are essential. And just very bluntly, if it takes sending 3, 5, 10 Abrams tanks there, let's do it. I understand all the difficulties with Abrams tanks, the jet fuel that's required, the training. The Pentagon ought to come forward with those Abrams tanks if that's what is necessary for the Germans to give permission to our allies to provide the Leopard 2 tanks and for the Germans to provide those tanks themselves. But it is more than just tanks. It is also long-range artillery, ATACMS, as well as more HIMARS. It is defensive weaponry like the Patriots. It is civilian infrastructure support, transformers, and generators. We're not asking for a blank check. We're asking for a big check with oversight and scrutiny. And what was impressive to me, in fact, is the fact that all of the scrutiny and oversight so far has disclosed no fraud or waste, no misappropriation of any of the military or humanitarian assistance that have been provided so far. Now, you know there have been announcements recently by President Zelensky of 2 firings. Very important, because it demonstrates what President Zelensky has told us, that there will be zero tolerance for fraud or waste. Those instances of misappropriation involved purchasing by Ukrainians of food or other kinds of supplies. No American military equipment was involved. But what's encouraging is that President Zelensky is continuing to pursue graft and corruption, as he promised to do when he was elected in 2019. I will just finish with this thought. Senator Graham is absolutely right. This fight is our fight. President Zelensky is not asking for American troops. We should not contemplate sending any. But there will be American troops on the ground if Putin goes against NATO allies, and that will be his next target. Make no mistake. Vladimir Putin is totally transparent about his strategy here. He wants to restore the old Soviet Union, the Russian Empire. It is a delusional plan, but it is Vladimir Putin's plan. And we will have troops involved if NATO allies are attacked. The reason why the Poles, the Swedes, others who are directly threatened, they feel so deeply about it, is they know Vladimir Putin's plan. So we are at a point of maximum danger, but major opportunity. Again, time is not on our side. We need to act now. There needs to be specific action to provide what Ukraine needs now. And again, I want to thank my colleagues for going with me, and turn to Sheldon Whitehouse.
Thank you, Dick. It was a pleasure to travel with Dick and Lindsey from the very early days of the last year Munich Security Conference. We were the original Senate caucus for Ukrainian victory when people were having trouble saying the V word. Yeah. And we were the early strong voices for very significant consequences for Russian oligarchs whose corruption has enabled all of this. We have pressed for a stronger effort against oligarchs, and the Biden administration responded with klepto-capture. We held a hearing in our Judiciary Committee on the improvements that have been made as the U.S. Justice Department and others go after oligarch assets. We pressed to make sure that legally we were able to take the seized assets and turn them over to Ukraine to help with its support and with its rebuilding. And we were able to get that into law in an amendment in the omnibus at the end of the last Congress. In Ukraine, we met with the Prosecutor General to see what more we can do in the world in which the International Criminal Court will be proceeding against war criminals. A new international tribunal will likely be proceeding against war criminals. The Prosecutor General has already begun his criminal prosecution of Russian soldiers for war crimes, and a very significant effort is going to need to be undertaken to provide damages, remedy, reparations to Ukrainians who were raped, who lost loved ones murdered by the Russians, whose homes and farms were destroyed, and making sure that we understand how those procedures need to be set up and what we can do, particularly with Russian sovereign funds and oligarch seized assets to support that, was a very helpful piece of all of this. I'll close by talking about one particular oligarch who we gave a lot of attention to while we were there, and that's Mr. Prigozhin and his Wagner Group. This is a mercenary terrorist group, and we are very pleased that the Biden administration has defined them as a transnational criminal organization, and we're going to continue to press to make sure that they are branded a foreign terrorist organization as well. There appears to be a significant rift opening up between the Wagner Group and the Russian army, and to the extent we can exploit that risk, this actually has strategic and tactical advantage on the field. The backstop to all of this is a world in which kleptocracy leads to danger for our country, and we have to continue our efforts across the board to make our world, and particularly our country, increasingly inhospitable to oligarch, criminal, and kleptocrat assets being protected here behind screens of anonymity. And it was a great trip, and I want to thank Lindsey and Dick for leading it. And with that, let me turn it back to you for questions.
Okay. A couple questions?
Regarding this latest dismissals, firings of high-ranking officials in Ukraine related to corruption, what are your expectations from the Zelensky administration regarding fighting this corruption, dealing with corruption?
Unrelenting. It's a defining moment for Ukraine. It's a defining moment for all of us, Germany, the United States, all of our allies. We expect that President Zelensky will follow through with the promise he made to us that Ukraine is going to change on the corruption front. Our
The anti-corruption parliamentarians.
Yes, we met with a group of anti-corruption parliamentarians who are trying to change the laws. So we're confident this is a first step in a long journey to change the way business is done. Back to USAID, we met with the general U.S. military assistants. We met with the 101st Airborne Commander, where the stuff flows through in Poland. We met with the 3-star in charge of, in Kyiv, and we're very reassured that our military assistance is going to where it should be going to, and the accountability and transparency is there. To my House colleagues, to those who believe we shouldn't write a blank check, I agree. To those who have concerns about what's going on in Ukraine, go. Don't talk about it in Washington. Get on a plane, get on a train, rest up, drink a lot of water, take your vitamins, and they will open up the books to you. We were told by the American military that any member of Congress who would like to come over in a reasonable fashion to look at what's going on is welcome to do so. I think President Zelensky welcomes that also. So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Freshly coming back from Ukraine, I know this is a bit of an abstract question, but I think one thing that's on a lot of Americans' minds as we continue to fund all this is, how long can we expect the war to last? Do you think it will be a matter of months or years? And also, even if Ukraine does get these tanks, breaks the stalemate in the east, the next question then becomes retaking Crimea by force. Do you think that's a feasible thing for them to do? And in your conversations with the Biden administration, do you think that's something they would fully get behind?
I don't want to speak for the Biden administration, but everything I have come to learn about the will and determination of the Ukrainians leads me to conclude retaking Crimea is within reach. And they need the artillery that will enable hitting targets, the sites of the missiles destroying infrastructure in Ukraine. And that's why the ATACMS are so important. That's why longer range, stronger artillery is so important. But let me just say this, the Ukrainians have to define what victory means to them. And everything we heard when we were there is the Ukrainians truly believe that they can retake all of the territory that Russia has seized. The Donbass, Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, it's Ukraine. As one of the ministers told us during one of our visits, in the end, it will be fine. And if it's not fine, it's not the end.
Can I just,
And I would just make one last point and then turn it back to Lindsey. The American military has consistently underestimated the Ukrainian fighting forces. The one constant in all of what we have seen or heard is the Ukrainian military has outperformed expectations. When our military leaders say, oh, well, it will take too long to train them on the Abrams tanks or to fly the F-16s. Just give them a chance. They are endlessly ingenious because they are fighting for their homeland, their independence, and their freedom. And if our back were up against that wall, we would be the same way. So my view is give them whatever it takes to win, and they can reconquer the territory that Putin has seized unlawfully, criminally, committing genocide. You know, on our last trip, we visited the mass graves at Bucha. And my stomach still turns when I think about what we saw. Those graves where women and children had their hands tied behind their backs, were shot in the head, hundreds of them, simply because they were Ukrainian. That's genocide. And Putin, his commanders, everyone responsible needs to be held accountable. That's what part of winning is too. The Ukrainians want to win, and they want to be seen to win, and they want to win the peace as well as the war.
just add one thing. In 1998, there was an agreement where the Ukraine, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear force on the planet. There was an agreement with the United States involved, Russia was involved, where Ukraine would turn over their nuclear weapons force to Russia with a guarantee of their sovereignty. At that time, Crimea and Donbass and all the East were part of Ukraine. Russia did not contest that. They did not say, and oh, by the way, we want more than the nukes, we want this part of Ukraine. This is manufactured by Putin. To those who believe this is a border dispute, you're crazy. The guy wants to rewrite the map of Europe. He wants to reconstruct the old Soviet Union. It started out with Crimea as Russia. Well, 4 days into the war, he was trying to kill Zelensky and take over Kyiv. If you're not paying attention, shame on you. He wants to destroy Ukraine as an independent nation. And he will keep going unless somebody stops him. So victory to be determined by Ukraine, yes. But victory in the eyes of the Ukraine is to get the land back they had in 1998.
They just found more classified documents.
We'll talk about that later.
Can I ask you a question about the corruption allegations that have arisen that you guys we talked about a little bit? Are you guys confident that the oversight on the U.S. side is sufficient the way it has been programmed into the bills that have been passed through the IGs, or do you believe there needs to be additional oversight at an independent cigar-style agency? Can you address that?
The country team briefing that we took in Ukraine at the embassy had unanimous confidence that the checks and balances in place were adequate and that the Ukrainians were honoring this, even in some cases at considerable difficulty with operations. You know, when you're actually running around being shot at to make sure you're saving your missile tubes so that you can keep score correctly is not an easy ask. And they are not complaining. They are doing it because they know that we need to have that confidence in America. And the embassy on the ground, knowing this, including our military officials, we're confident.
Our embassy officials and also the military leaders responsible for the logistics of delivering this stuff have done their own audits and oversight. They are confident that there's no waste, no corruption. The embassy civilian staff has done their checks and balances, and those findings align with the findings of the Ukrainians. And we met in addition with the Minister of Infrastructure, very impressive guy, His name is Alexandra Kubrikov, who is working miracles by keeping the lights on and restoring the transformers. And his deputy minister is one of the officials who has resigned. And he and his team indicated, and I think we didn't know about it at the time, but they have ongoing oversight. So I think there are lots of different eyes on here.
I just wondered if Senator Graham, a question especially about the money here. You know, obviously you're asking for the administration right now to take action. But looking down the road, especially to our two budget leaders here, can you talk about how you look at this next budgetary process in terms of the military specifically? Do you think that we need to see spending come down for the military? Do we think it should be protected? Just bringing this all next.
Well, the reason I voted for the omnibus bill, as much as I dislike the process, inflation's been running close to 7% for the last year. The bill that we passed from the Senate increased military spending by 10%. It was a needed shot in the arm. Ukraine's not the only conflict we have. When you look at the military presence west of the international date line regarding China, it's inadequate to the task. I think we all believe that our military-industrial complex has been under stress. We're running out of weapons, so now's not the time to go cheap on our military. GDP to military defense spending is a little over 3%. That's on the historically low side. So here's what I would challenge my colleagues who want to pull the plug on Ukraine. What's the cost of abandoning Ukraine? How much will it cost us as a nation to let Putin win? I think you're going to have the map of Europe rewritten. You're probably going to suck us into a conflict with Article 5 being involved. China will certainly see it as a green light to go after Taiwan. So the cost of abandoning Ukraine is far greater financially and otherwise. And what I think will happen, we're going to have a hard time getting a budget, but continuing resolutions are a danger to the military. And I'm hoping we can find common ground here and keep the money flowing to our military, but in a reasonable way help Ukraine militarily to evict Russia.
And, you know, I just add one more point. What we're spending has to be viewed as an investment. It's an investment in deterrence.
Amen.
And frankly, if we had made that investment a year ago, maybe there wouldn't have even been an invasion. I came back from our first trip before the invasion saying we should provide more arms, impose stronger sanctions, show Putin that we were going to be in this fight all the way, and maybe would have had second thoughts about losing close to 200,000 people to casualties. But the amount that we are investing is a fraction of our total military budget. We need to be mindful about our readiness and preparedness. I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee. We need to pass the NDAA and do whatever it takes for our national defense. I think there is a bipartisan agreement on that score. And I think very significantly, as you see from this picture, there'll be bipartisan agreement on the cause of defending Ukraine.
Two more.
Senator Graham, just back to the tanks. You said you were talking to German allies. Is their final decision, because it sounds like it's going to be a yes, particularly to let other countries send the tanks they have. Is it contingent on the U.S. making this announcement on the Abrams tanks?
I don't want to get ahead of our allies, but here's where I think we stand today. I think there's an increasing appreciation in Germany how important their role has become in helping Ukraine. We have a lot of American service members stationed in Germany that helps us with protecting America. They helped us in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I want to thank the German people and their government for being a good ally. I am hopeful that not only they will green light Poland, but they will embrace the idea of sending the Leopard 1 and 2 tank from Germany in the next few days. As Senator Blumenthal said, time is of the essence. We need to start the flow now. To the Pentagon, there's serious discussions going on right now. I want to compliment the Biden administration for the kleptocracy program. I want to compliment them for increasing military assistance. I am frustrated at the pace, but I would say to the Department of Defense, if you will greenlight a handful of Abrams tanks, it'd be one of the most consequential decisions you've made in this effort to allow Ukraine to expel Russia, because there will be no excuse left. And I do believe that Germany is feeling the pressure of being on center stage at a time when we're trying to right wrongs. This is a chance for Germany to be on the right side of history, and I believe they will take it.
It was reported in the last few minutes that Chancellor Scholz will, in fact, make this announcement.
Well, there you go. That shows you how powerful listen, the reason I said what I said.
You guys tweeted it out and we got that result.
Yeah.
Way to go, guys.
I've been talking now. Listen, I lived in Germany for 4.5 years. To my Democratic colleagues, you've been terrific on Ukraine. I mean, you have not blinked. It's been so much fun to work for a common purpose and a common cause. You know, Sheldon's like the oligarch's worst nightmare. You know, digs to the right of me, which is hard to do. So
Careful.
Yeah, careful. But the bottom line is, I think the Germans are now appreciating the moment. This dust up over tanks will serve us well long term. And let me tell you why. Because it's now a realization by the United States and Germany that the goal is to help Ukraine evict Russia from Ukraine. That now is the goal. There is no off-ramp. The Ukrainians are not going to make it easy to end this war by agreeing to allow part of their country to be given to Putin by force of arms. And I think they understand that in Berlin, they understand it in Washington, and the reason we understand it is we've been there. And if it were America, we would have exactly the same response. So the fact that the tanks are going to flow from Germany and hopefully from America, to me, is something to celebrate, because it's an acknowledgement that the goal now is to be with Ukraine until every last Russian soldier is evicted from Ukrainian soil.
Senator Graham, also in the past couple minutes, it turns out classified documents have turned up. And Mike Pence,
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Can you just address the
Senator,
Yeah, I will over here. I will over here.
Nope, that's not what this is about.
That's not what this is about.
you also speak to that?
You can talk with me, but
Senator, can you, when
Senator
it's over,
Blumenthal,
can
would
you
you like
just
to
Yes,
take it on
yes,
camera
yes.
for us? It would help out.
we're done with Ukraine?
I think we're done.
Thank you.
Okay, we're done with
Mike
Ukraine.
is helpful.
Classified
Mike
documents.
Pence's attorney has written to the National Archives saying some documents have turned up at the Indiana home.
Okay, so let's find out how that happened. You got Trump, you got Pence, you got Biden. The only thing I think you'll find at my house is a bunch of Chick-fil-A bags on the floor. The bottom line is, I don't know how this happened. We need to get to the bottom of it. I don't believe for a minute that Mike Pence is trying to intentionally compromise national security. I think that about Biden and Trump, but clearly we've got a problem here. So hopefully when this is all said and done, maybe we're overclassifying things. That may be part of the problem. But count me in for getting this fixed. And the Vice President, I know very well, I'm sure he'll stand up and be the first to say, if I had classified information in my house, to explain why. I think he's one of the most decent people I've ever met. And so what became a political problem, for Republicans, is now a national security problem for the country. Thanks.
Should there be a special counsel to look at, how does this get investigated?
I don't want to go there yet.
And should House Republicans investigate the Pence matter?